Thank you. Yeah, you're probably on here more than I am, Alex. All right, let's get started. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm Gina Reganini, Director of Educational Initiatives in Alumni Relations, and I am so excited to welcome you to Husky How-To Communication Strategies for Managers. Being a manager myself, I have a particular interest in today's topic, as it seems like all of you do as well. And I'm sure, as you are, I'm always looking for ways to enhance and strengthen my work in this area. And I can attest that we are in very good hands today with our speaker, Dr. Alex Fronduto from the Graduate School of Education, or GSE, which is in the College of Professional Studies. I'll introduce Alex in a moment, but first, just a bit of housekeeping. If you need closed captions, you can turn them on in your settings in this Zoom meeting using the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your screen. As Alex mentioned, we'll be using the chat a lot and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat and we'll go through them afterwards. And as I mentioned, the session is being recorded and will be posted on the Alumni Relations YouTube channel after we are done. I encourage you to check out some of our other recordings as well, as there's some great content on there. And so to add to that great content, I am so excited to start our session today, Communication Strategies for Managers, with Dr. Alex Fronduto, Associate Teaching Professor in the Graduate School of Education and Academic Lead for the MED in Higher Education Administration Program and Graduate School of Education Lead for Strategic Engagement. He's also a GSE alum to boot, so we love to see that. He teaches courses including Foundations of Higher Education, The New Supervisor, Challenges in Supervision, and Strategic Enrollment Management, and serves as chair and second reader for the Doctor of Education dissertation students. He is also the founder of the Higher Education Networking Collective, a growing professional community dedicated to fostering connection, collaboration, and career development among higher education professionals. It was actually at the HENC's Professional Development Day last fall that I heard Alex present on our topic today, and I knew his insight on this topic would be so valuable to fellow Huskies as well. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Take it away.
Awesome, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm going to just share my screen really quick. So obviously some slides are going to be helpful to navigate our conversation. Just want to make sure I also get my chat up and ready. So first and foremost, thank you for spending some time wherever you are across the globe, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, to spend some time with us today. I think being able to just step away and do professional development like this is so important. So I'm just encouraging you to try to be present as much as possible. Again, some of you may be in the middle of your workday. I hear that if you have to step away or anything like that, but just wanted to thank you for taking time out of your day to do that. So Gina already gave a great overview of who I am. I'll just touch on a few other pieces because I do have a wide range of experiences, which I think actually is very helpful for people when you think about supervising because there are so many settings that you might be supervising in. And so before I went into academia full time, I've been at Northeastern for about 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in enrollment management within higher education, so admissions, financial aid, etc., for about 13 years. Went everything from kind of basic entry level all the way to supervising staff on actually multiple offices and multiple campuses. And so, dotted lines is always an interesting topic for me as well. And then I have a science background, which is why I also cheered for someone that was talking about biochemistry. So I've done a lot of qualitative research now, but I did a lot of lab research before my undergrad and my master's. In addition to having one in education, I also have them in chemistry. So anyone that ever wants to talk science, I feel you as well. In terms of my supervising kind of research is really important for you all to know about, to know kind of where am I coming from. I have obviously lived and breathed supervising, which I told you just a second ago, but I also do a ton of research on it. So I teach some courses. I've also done qualitative, I've done quantitative. I have another research study coming out around really looking at first, I went from the employee side, like what is employees looking for in a supervisor, which some of that's going to be talked about here. And now I'm working a lot on what do new supervisors need to be successful. So thinking about what do they need in terms of just knowledge, but also in terms of skill set and like where are they getting that information or how are they not getting that information. So I just kind of wanted to share about that a little bit to know where I sit in terms of all of this. Some things that I'm not, which is really important. I'm not your human resources office wherever you work. So I'm going to give you my thoughts, suggestions, but of course, your policies and procedures will always override anything that I say. I'm also not a representative of your institution or company, organization. So again, thinking about the context is really important. Things that I may say may or may not apply to you. And so again, with so many people in the room, it's important for me to try to give kind of a high level overview, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then lastly, even though I shared a bunch of things that I've done in the supervising space and the research space and my teaching, I don't think anyone can be an expert in everything. And that's why people have kind of subfields. Some people look on communication, some people look at workplace culture, etc. So know that like I love questions and some of it may be my opinion, some of it may be research backed, and I'll make sure I share that with you as I go throughout. Some quick rules of engagement. Like I said, first and foremost, being present is really important to me and being here and being respectful. So as Gina said, I love questions. You know, you might have comments as well using like chat, talking about, what you find interesting, what do you agree with, what don't you agree with. I just ask if you're going to ask questions or bring up scenarios, please make sure that you're being mindful that this is being recorded. There are many people on this call, so I would stay away from using names, where you work, etc., just for kind of confidentiality reasons. And I encourage other people when you're listening, right? Active listening, but also no judgment as well. And so I think that's really important, especially as we have some open discussions. So, what do I actually hope to cover? So, obviously, we kind of had this general idea of just communication strategies. That's very vague, right? And so, I really wanted to think long and hard about what I hope people would get out of this kind of conversation and kind of training. It came to kind of three specific areas, right? Before you can even talk about communicating, you need to talk about supervising and how you are an effective and/or, have a quality supervision. So I think that's where we need to start. And then we need to start about why do people struggle to communicate, right? We need to understand where there might be a lack of training, lack of understanding, to then get into the idea of, well, what can we do about those things? And so I wanted to kind of go into three paths about that, kind of like an overview of each, so that you could have some tangible tools no matter where you are. Hopefully, one of these three things will kind of resonate with you. I want to talk general again, how do we become quality supervisors? One-on-one meetings, which that's common across any type of sector, right? Typically, you're meeting with your staffs in some way, shape, or form, and then kind of give you an intro to providing constructive feedback because I think a lot of people, that's where people really struggle. And I could spend hours talking about that. And so I want to kind of give you some tools and resources in addition to just explaining how you can try to handle those types of situations. So, like I said, we need to start somewhere. And so, first and foremost, we got to start where we were and where we are today to really understand about supervising because it's always interesting to me that people think about supervising. Supervising has existed for a long, long time. But when I ask people, how much did you learn or what training did you have? It's always interesting to hear people's responses. So this is back in 1985. I bolded that on purpose. So back in 1985, most mid and upper levels, according to research, got little or no formal training in the area of supervising and management. Okay, so that's 1985. I'm curious, and this is where we start using the chat, so get ready. How many of you felt prepared for your first time supervising? Yes or no? You can go in the chat. Just type yes or no. And I want to see big no, 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 and no. Sort of. I love sort of. I'll take sort of. Ha, a laugh. So that's probably a no. So you're not alone, right? I think people think that, okay, it's been around forever, people get training. In 1985, everyone said there was no training. And still in 2018, so, getting more current, still more than half of the managers said they had received no form of training. So nothing, right? So we're still in a bucket. In 2017, if people did receive the training, so again, some people were finally getting training, they felt like their training was inadequate, or it was like, here's some general like HR policies, good luck. Which is not ideal either, right? Right? We want to make sure that people are set up for success. So many people become supervisors because they get like promoted at their job and then it suddenly becomes supervising. And it's a struggle for people to really think about how you do it well. And so why does it matter if you're a good supervisor? It matters for you as an individual, and it also matters for wherever you're working, right? Sector, company, organization, because we know that your supervising actually impacts, right, your employees. Their idea of their job, their workplace culture starts with you as a manager. And so we know that that plays a role in retention. We know that people leaving is very costly. It costs a lot of money, maybe not thinking about it dollar for dollar, but there's actually a lot of research out there that it will take about 2 to 3 times a person's salary when they leave to actually hire and onboard a new person. So it's actually very costly for an organization to lose staff. We also see 75% of Americans say that their boss is the most stressful part of their workday. And that's actually very recent. That's within the last couple years. So that is not an old fact. And again, people are being supervisors, but are they intentionally thinking and preparing themselves for it? And the last thing I really like to include is that even if you felt prepared prior, we know that the idea of work has changed across the globe in respect to COVID, respect to Great Resignation, respect to a lot of different aspects over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so people are now trying to deal with not only in person, but hybrid, fully remote types of aspects that maybe you never had to deal with before. So I quickly, like I said, want to kind of talk a little bit about the role of a supervisor and thinking about why that matters. So this actually comes directly from some research that I did that I mentioned earlier about what are employees looking for. So I wanted to go out and really talk to as many employees as possible to really get an idea of what they're looking for in a manager. And you'll notice, again, I won't read line for line, but really some strong aspects that they're really looking for. And the ones that really catch my eye that I like to talk about, supportive and present, a coach, empathetic, and authentic are four really interesting ones to me because most of those things have nothing to do with the job itself. Yes, they support the job function in some way, but they're really a personality trait or how you're portraying yourself to your employee. And what this tells me is that a lot of people are looking for their supervisor to not only be helping them in their day-to-day kind of task level, ideas, they're also looking to them to be a kind of a support system. I'm not saying like a therapist or helping them in their personal life, but still being there as a support to guide them professionally, looking at them as almost as a mentor. And so that's really important because we think about what people are really looking at, not only for when they're looking for a job, but when they're looking at their manager. You'll see other ones about thinking about work-life balance, self-care, professional development. Many of those, again, have been more recent things. Some of that is tied to generational, and some of that is tied to the idea of work changing. And so I encourage you to really think about that holistic 360 view of who you are as a supervisor and if you are actually attuning to the needs of your employees. And again, we know based off what the issues are, and if you try to do well, we actually know again that the research shows that you will then get the outcomes you're looking for, right? You want your staff to stay. You want them to be productive, right? For the company, hit targets, KPIs, whatever, again, the sector is. Having a positive outlook, wanting to come to work, being motivated. All of that is super important. And it comes down to that your leadership and your supervision is important to do that. And so the reason I scaffold my conversation around these items is because that's how we need to get to the idea of what do we need to communicate? Because communication is typically one of the highlighted things that is an issue. that people will say, like, I don't know how to communicate effectively. I don't know what I should be communicating. And so that's kind of a real standpoint into our next piece. And so I have a question for all of you. Why does poor communication exist? And again, it's more specific into the workplace. So if you want to go in the chat, just a couple notes. You don't have to write a paragraph, but why do you think it exists? Or what are some ways it does exist as poor? Afraid of giving bad news, anxiety of the difficult conversation. What do other people think? Why does poor communication, lack of caring, lack of feedback? Okay, I like specificity. Other thoughts? Why does poor communication exist? Confrontation. So we're all kind of going a lot of the conflict, a difficult conversation. What about in general? What happens if I was just trying to ask you to do something? Poor communication from above or modeled. Okay, that's getting more closer to what I'm thinking about. Great. Give it another minute. Other thoughts? Misinterpretation, poor listening. Just, ooh, we got a lot from Deandra. Thank you. Trying to move fast. Ooh, I hear that one a lot. Anxiety, too large. So there's been a lot of research in this area, not mine, but something that I talk about a lot. And so, overarching, there are a lot of reasons why poor communication exists, which is actually not so great, right? Because if there are so many reasons, there are so many areas of needing improvement. It's not like a one size, one answer. As you all just said in the chat, so many of you brought up different reasons. And so it's hard. Communication, and this is why it's usually the number one kind of way that people need training and need professional development, and it doesn't always come up. So you'll see, right, lack of clarity, which someone talked about, like unclear, vague. So, right, that's poor communication if you can't communicate effectively what you're trying to have someone do or what you want them to change, right? So, thinking about how you word things is really important, which we're going to get to. Lack of training. No one ever told you how to communicate effectively. Or again, it was modeled poorly, which someone else said, right? No feedback culture, right? One way communication. Someone doesn't feel comfortable speaking. That goes down to like psychological safety, workplace culture, which could have bigger issues. This is a big one, tech. People sending emails when they should be having a conversation, or a text message, or a Teams message, or a Slack message that gets misinterpreted. The epitome of, do you have 5 minutes? And you have no idea what it means. All of that anxiety comes up. Someone already mentioned this, right? Power dynamics. You don't have that comfortability, the safety, assumptions, misinterpretations. That came up a few times. And this is more specific, as you'll see, like there are a lot of reasons why assumptions or misinterpretations may come up, right? And you'll see some of them on the slide. But right, thinking about generationally, thinking culturally, there's a lot more into that, which is why you really need to understand who your employees are when you're trying to even think about how you're going to communicate with them. And we're going to spend some time on that as well. Too busy. Many of you talked about this. This is, even though this is not in order of like top to, most happening versus least. In my opinion, time is a big one. People either don't have the time to communicate effectively, as in thinking about what they're going to say, or they think right off the cuff. And I find this a lot with difficult conversations. People like pull people in offices or address something right away and haven't thought about how they're going to address it. And that becomes a huge issue. And I already tied low psychological safety with some other aspects because all of these are intertwined. Though they're written separately, you could have multiple of these concerns and issues. And so I encourage you to think about which ones of these resonate with you. Again, we're not going to cover every single one today, but these are the different ways that you, or maybe you're in a higher leadership position and you have managers below you, right? Like, how are you supporting your managers and how they're then supporting your staff, right? Ultimately, thinking about productivity and retention. No matter where you sit, you still have this type of responsibility, especially as you move higher and higher in terms of hierarchy. So, when I think about all of this, and I mentioned this earlier, but I like to think Instead of you as a manager or a supervisor, I like to think of you as a coach. And I'm going to tell you why, and I hope that it will resonate with some of you. And then we're going to go through kind of an example. What a lot of people are looking for, like I said, is looking for someone that is supportive, that they can go to for whatever that may be. It really ideally, right? A coach, whether it's a sport, it's theater, it's whatever type of you think of a coach other than like supervising, they're trying to make you a better version, right? They're trying to help you improve in whatever way that might be. They're not just thinking about the single task. Like, I don't want you to be able to score in the net for soccer. Okay, that might be one of the items, but ideally a coach is trying to make you better all over, right? And so they're considering the entire person. And I'm going to use that a lot because I do think that's where a lot of supervisors struggle is where the boundary of a relationship becomes between an employee and a supervisor. And that is hard, and every single person is going to define that differently. Ideally, right, you want to help them grow. I say, and people don't always love this, but like when people move up, and even if they have to leave to move up, I felt like I did a good job because I'm supporting them. They are growing as a professional. That is more important to me than making sure I have a body to do a task. And so I am always looking about how I can help people get to wherever they want to be, right? What can I do? Can I put you on a committee? Can I give you structured feedback that you need to get to the next point? Or if you're not hitting certain goals or whatnot, how can I help you do that? And so it's really important, right? Thinking about how you're supporting, providing feedback. And coaches, as you'll see in the last bullet, right, they're concerned about the individual. They get down to the individual level about what their needs are. And that's crucial. Even if you have multiple employees, everyone is an individual, and how you handle each individual is going to be very different. And so I encourage you to really think about that. It's more than just managing people, it's more than just leading people. Thinking about how are you really coaching them to be successful and whatever that may mean to them. And so when I think about communicating, I like to put the lens of a coach. And instead of an instructor, I like to think of you as a facilitator. And you may have heard this before, but right, asking rather than telling. We all love to solve the world's problems. We love to tell people what to do. And I'm not saying just the like, can you go do that, like an actual task? But like if someone comes to you with a problem, it's to most people, it's easier to solve their problem for them and it's quicker for you. And so, how can you get past that, right? Because you need to empower them, right? Most of you would love when your employee comes to you with a problem and comes with a solution. That's like one of the big things I always hear about, especially newer professionals. You know, managers are like, how do I get them to think more? How do I get them to apply their knowledge? I don't want to, baby them or micromanage them, but I feel like I have to. I always turn it back to them and say, well, how are you allowing yourself to empower them? Because more times than not, the traits that they have are coming from their supervisor or a previous supervisor if they've had multiple. And so you kind of need to think about that. And so, what is a fundamental need of your individual, right? Thinking about their autonomy, thinking about how you can provide them support and engagement. So, here's an example. So someone comes to you and they say, I don't know how to do this. I'm struggling with this, or I want to do this. Again, most of us are going to lead to, you should do this. You should do that. Why don't you do this? Right? You are telling them and giving them the solution. It is pretty much a one-way type of communication. Whereas I encourage you to switch and ask questions, right? So if the same person came to you, why don't you ask them some more in-depth questions so you can get to the root and have them start thinking through it, right? Like, why is it important? Why do you need to do this? How would you go about doing it? How is this different? Right? All of these are going to be really crucial questions. So they're thinking through it and you're asking them because you're engaging with them, right? That again, it's a two-way communication. which is really important because some of the issues we just talked about of issues with communicating relied on not feeling comfortable to ask questions, not feeling like they could have a two-way communication, etc. And so by thinking of yourself as a coach, specifically as a facilitator of conversation, you could be more successful in how you're communicating in your day-to-day practice, right? My first section, like I said, this is really like your day-to-day life as a supervisor. How can you be flipping the script and having different types of conversations with your employees to be more successful? So I have a quick poll that I'm going to try to do. So it's going to pop up on your screen. Hopefully, you should have a question, and I'm going to put it on the slide too. But there should be a pop-up that's asking you, right? If a staff member comes to you with a problem, like I just said, what would your instinct as a coach be? So you just click a button and I'll give it a minute. People are clicking quickly. I love that. It worked out great. I'll give it one more minute. But also, I get to see how many people are here. I love it. So got 22 out of 27, so I will take that. So I'm going to share the results just so you can kind of see them. So you'll see we're going to a little bit split, a little bit more heavy on help them think it through and ask a question, which is exactly right. A or D are possible solutions, right? I'm trying to be some tricky. I wanted you to really think about what's important to you, right? But A and D are the coaching sweet spot, right? If you ask them a question or help them think it through, you're putting it as a two-way conversation and essentially asking them, right? That's the ask, not the tell. B, share my experience. That does have a place, right? That's kind of on the bridge of like you're still telling them, but you're probably trying to give an example, right? And so again, it has its place. I would just watch how often you're doing it. Because again, if you're always just sharing your experience, you're constantly not letting them think through it. So again, you may need to share an example. And again, C is, which no one chose, which is great, but that's typically what most people are going to do is going to give a direct answer. And it's a hard habit to break. So again, I hope that everyone on here is like, yeah, I do this already. That's awesome. This then is just a reassurance that you're doing a great job. If you answered this based off what I just said and you're not practicing it, I encourage you to practice. So I'm going to close that. So, a couple common mistakes I want to leave you with in this first general section, and I've kind of alluded to some of these. And sometimes I'm going to have extra resources right after these slides. Some of them I'm not going to go into in everything just because we have a short time together. But I wanted to give this, you're going to get this slide deck after. I always get that as a question so that you can have some of these resources or diagrams or things for you to reflect on, utilize in your own practice. So just know that if I'm just talking quickly about a couple things, it's more because I just wanted to give you more resources. So first, what I see when people supervise more than one person, you treat them all the same, right? You're like, okay, this is good supervising. So I will do this with person A, person B, person C. But everyone is different. And I've said that a few times now. And so what you need to really think about is how do you get to know each employee as an individual, which again is exactly the coaching model, right? Thinking of them as an individual, not as a bunch or as a group, because they don't have all of the same wants and needs, and they don't have a one size fits all approach. I also tell people many people, you can put it in the chat if you want, but I'll just kind of more of a rhetorical question too. How many of you supervise based off how you were supervised, either positively or negatively? I hear many people say, I loved my supervisor, and so I do that. Or I hated my supervisor. I'll never do what they do. Has anyone done that or are doing that? If so, you can put yes or no in the chat. If that's, again, good or bad, it's interesting to see. And we're a sum of all our parts, especially the bad ones. I try to stick to positive inspiration. And so I'm not here to tell you that's a bad thing, but I am here to tell you to think differently. And what I mean by that is you are making assumptions about your staff. Emphasis is you, double underlined, you do not like what that person did. Does your employee like it? You don't know unless you've asked. So you might have hated it, but maybe your employee would have liked that. Or vice versa. What you loved about a previous supervisor, what happens if they hate it? Right? And so that open conversation is really important because, again, one of the things we see is that supervisors are basing their modeling, good or bad, based off their experience. And it is a very you thing, and it should be about them, right? So again, that phrasing is really important, right? It's not about you, it is about them as the employee. And as a coach, you care about them as a person. And so I encourage you, and I'm going to talk about this in the next couple of slides, that if you don't know your employees on a individual level to the point that you could figure out whether or not the things that they want or don't want, dislike, like, you want to get to that level because it's only going to help you coach them as a full person. It's only going to help you with retention. It's only going to help with their motivation, which we know all of those things combined are so crucial for productivity. Do you have to worry from an equity perspective about treating staff members differently? So it depends on how you're treating them differently, right? I'm not saying that like you should ignore someone because they want to be ignored or they I don't know, is perceived, right? Like that's part of when you think about equity, right? Like the perception is that you are pri favoritism or something to that extent. As long as you have reason and it came from the employee and it makes sense, right? If an employee says, I never want to meet with you, I don't want to do one-on-ones, well, okay, there's a different conversation there. But how you are prioritizing their needs could be different. And if you have documentation in some way to support that, then I don't think it would be a concern. But that's a great question. People like to sum people up in their generation. I'm going to show you a slide next that talks about generations, just so you get an understanding of how generations are different. But people then bucket people. No one is one person, right? That's where we get to prejudice and all of these other things that are not good, especially in the workplace. So don't do it. And again, not understanding the whole employee, which I've kind of already talked about a lot. So again, I'm only going to talk about the top line in this, but I wanted to give it because I love this diagram because as you may or might not know, we are in one of the times that we have the most generations in the workforce. And so that means we're managing a lot of types of people, a lot of different ideas of people. And so the communication and feedback needs, which is what the priority of this conversation is, could be very different. Again, you shouldn't put everyone in these buckets, but it is helpful to know where many of them are sitting or what many of them were trained. Again, back to the modeling conversation is very important. And so, right, all the way from like traditionalists and boomers being like, okay, I don't need much feedback. I'm okay with that. All the way up to like, if I don't hear anything, that's fine. To now, people really looking for frequent, prompt, face-to-face feedback. They need that. And it's not to say some people will label that as like, oh, they're so needy. I feel like all I'm doing is hand holding them. That's very different than providing feedback or engagement to your employees that someone is wanting, right? Those are two different things. And so I encourage you to think about it differently. And you'll see there's other different styles and motivations here. Again, I'm not going to go into, but I think it is great for you to have as a resource. But understanding this could be helpful. Another resource I'm going to give you is one thing that myself and, to be honest, one of a co-presenter I've done with some other research and some other presentations about on what she does in terms of onboarding her employees. So either when she starts a new position, if there's employees already there that she's supervising, or vice versa, that she's gaining new employees. This is a survey built through Google Forms, you could build it through anything, of a way to really capture a lot of the things about your employee. It can be the first thing you ask them to do before you have your first like intro one-on-one. And one of the things that she does is set up expectations right from the front. What are her expectations of the employee? And what are the expectations of the employee of her? And again, those can change, right? That's an open dialogue, right? But just generally sharing some things is really important so they get to know a little bit about you. And so she goes on. Again, what are my commitments to you in terms of like how are we going to meet? When are we going to communicate? What are we going to do about feedback? Again, I'm not going to read everything on this, but you'll have it. But again, really thinking about what is the commitment on both sides. So you have that mutual agreement. You've probably heard, especially in like projects and things, right? Like what is your charter? What is your shared commitments? But she also asks a lot of questions. And some you may or may not ever have thought to ask, right? Some of the ones that I really like are what part of your job do you love and what do you hate? Again, it's not saying you're going to change it, but it's helpful for you to know. I always like, here's expectations, right? What is your dream? Where do you want to be in a year, 2 years, and how can I get you there? How will I know if you're having a bad day? How do you want to communicate? Do you want to be face to face? Are you okay with a Teams call? All of these things, and like what do they dislike about past supervisors or what do they like? Again, that's about them, not you, right? You are asking them actually, like what did you like about your previous supervisor? What didn't you like? And so she has everyone fill this out. And then in their first kind of onboarding one-on-one, they can talk through this a little bit more. Like, oh, I got to learn a lot about you. Thanks so much. Let's talk about some of these things so I can learn more about you as an individual and how you want to be best supported, right? And it's always coming from an area of care. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I know people have been putting questions in the chat, so feel free to continue to do that. Um, I'm going to read the last two that are here. My key approach to start has always been to center the person by being with them where they are. I love that. Thus, granular listening. I love that. Great job. I love that. Don't know who you are, iPhone, but thank you for communicating. I love that. Um, but definitely, if you have questions as we're going on, feel free to drop them in the chat. So I want to talk a little bit about one-on-ones. This is a common area. One of the first questions I'm going to ask, how often do you have a one-on-one with your staff? And I don't mean a staff meeting, I mean individually, even if you have multiple. I'll give you a hint. There is no right answer. So please feel free to go. I like Jill's. You're getting to what I was about, kind of alluding to. Weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, their choice. Weekly and my door is open. I like the and because I'll tell you that just my door is open actually has a lot of research that no one will go in your door. So it sounds like a great saying, but it actually isn't. But you have an and, so yours is perfect. That means you're meeting with them, having structured time, and they can come to you if they need you. So that's perfect. Thank you, Judy. So depends on the job. I agree. And so that's exactly it, right? Because I encourage some forms of one-on-ones. You should have structured, catered time to all of your employees. But back to what we just said, every employee may need something differently, right? You may not need to meet with all of them weekly. Maybe you do, right? And that really should be a mutual conversation. What do they need and what do you need? Like I was working with a staff member recently who some of her employees had no one-on-one and they didn't feel like they needed it. I was like, well, maybe you need it as the supervisor, not to just check up on them, but to support them, right? To have those professional development conversations, have those growth conversations. It's not a check-in meeting. That's the biggest thing I will tell everyone. I don't like a one-on-one being phrased as a status meeting or what is the work you're doing. So a couple ideas here. I have a video, so hopefully you're going to be able to hear it. Please someone tell me in the chat if you're not going to be able to.
So one of the most effective leaders I know says she does not have one-on-ones with people unless they come with the answer to 3 different questions. She said she started to notice that in the company, people only did one-on-ones when somebody screwed up, and because of that, no one was showing up. So she came up with 3 questions that would change the whole focus of the meeting, and now people show up to those meetings all the time. And the first question they had to bring the answer to was, what are you most proud of doing since we last met? Which allowed the employee to focus on their improvement, not just at what was wrong. And the second question is, what skill or ability did you use to make that moment you're most proud of? Which allowed them to clarify what they do well. And the final question is, what impact did what you do have on other people, which helped them see the value they bring in the organization? She said not only do these answers help her find more clarity on what's going on, but it helps the employee find more confidence in what they're doing. Because the answer to these three questions doesn't just reduce the focus on problems, it eliminates problems altogether. So what
I always like that video and those questions because, especially at the end where it's saying, not only is it eliminating problems, for me, I think it is empowering, right? You're empowering your employees, right? And these are things we're going to talk about with some of the specific things that I think are important for a
so one
one-on-one.
of
So, one of the first questions is whose meeting is the one-on-one? Is it yours as the manager or is it theirs as the employee? So, go in the chat. Is it the managers or the employees? Okay, we've got employee, theirs, both. It's theirs, but I need it too. It should be both, but it's mostly mine, primarily. Okay. So I encourage you all to think, of course, you're both present. So I'm not obviously in some way, shape, or form is going to be both of yours. But when I ask this question, what I really mean is who should lead it? How is it structured? And I'm going to talk through a little bit of that. In my belief, and some research, but there's always arguments to be out there. It is the employees. You are there being present to support them, and you may have things you want to talk about, but ultimately the time and most of the agenda should be them. And so the next question I always ask, and again, we can't answer all of these today. I'm going to kind of just give you my insights, but it should be a shared agenda that is mostly coming from them for two reasons. One, it is mostly their time. Second, if you have anything to say, you should be trying to make sure they're aware of it ahead of time, right? And so sharing an agenda prior will help with anxiety. No one wants to walk into a room and then be caught off guard. So if there's something you're expecting, sharing that expectation ahead of time. Maybe it's data, maybe it's just a simple task. Like, I would love to talk about this. Can you come with this report? Not assuming they know to do that. Or it might be, I want to talk about the issue that happened at last week's event. Okay, well, now they can make sure they're thinking about what happened last week and have a good conversation about it. They're not going to be caught off guard randomly in your one-on-one and saying, hey, what happened? Who can cancel the one-on-one? I really highly encourage you to never cancel a one-on-one because it's ideally not your time. Again, emergencies come up. Rescheduling needs to happen. What I see so often though is that one-on-ones get rescheduled because, another important meeting happens or we just cancel it and then it slowly trickles away. It slowly becomes, oh, I don't know if we really need this. And if that's the case, I encourage you to be then thinking about why it doesn't matter. It's probably for the wrong reasons. You probably are not necessarily talking about the right things, in my opinion. We already covered how often. Depends. And that is totally okay. And I encourage you that if you are doing it weekly with everyone, check in. Do you need it weekly with everyone? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? Really thinking about how you structure your time. I have some people that they'll meet weekly, but the goals of those meetings are different. I love to have at least once a month be devoted to more like professional development and growth because that's the least common that's covered in a one-on-one. It's always about tasks. And the last thing is, where does it take place? I think there's a power dynamic if someone's walking into your office. That's my opinion. You're behind a desk. If it's in person, right? If you're in Teams, whatever, it might be different. But if you're in person, there's a different dynamic of someone walking into your office. I've heard some people, and I loved this too, like if you're in an area you could walk, right? Like, could you walk and get a coffee, right? Like, it doesn't have to be so formal. It actually helps be more personable if you're doing something different. Oh, it's a really nice day out. Why don't we go sit out over here? It also might be helpful that they're getting out of your office. They might be more free to speak their mind. Most people don't want to speak their mind if their employee they're having an issue with is right next door, right? Or they don't feel as comfortable in this space just to share their thoughts. And so I encourage people to really think about maybe it's not all the time, but could you change up where it's happening or how it's happening? If you have hybrid employees, like could you fluctuate between, virtual versus in person? Obviously, if it's completely remote, then you don't really have the option, but definitely being on screen and present, not a phone call, would be advantageous in my opinion. And some people think about documentation as a negative thing. I always like to tell people that you should definitely be taking notes in some way, recapping what is happening, keeping up to date, partly because this will really help you as a manager to support the growth of someone or keep track if you're having if you have a staff of like seven, like how do you really know what's happening? Again, that doesn't mean you're like typing notes at all moments, but you're trying to think about where does it happen? And again, you can use these in a variety of ways. I've heard people talk about rewriting job descriptions. I've heard, when someone needs to get a salary negotiation, like you can talk about all the things you've talked about with that employee because you're ultimately having to be an advocate. That advocate is really important. Do you recommend taking notes during the meeting or as a recap? So it really depends. It kind of depends if you're in person or not, where you're located, if you can take notes. I like to make them mutually exclusive, like unless it's a note that you don't want your employee to see, but I'm always in the best regard that your staff should never be surprised by anything you say or do, especially when it comes to like evaluating them. So I like to have it as like a shared note area that you both can be taking notes at some point if it's after the fact, etc. It also helps with documentation that they both agree, like maybe it is about feedback and you both have agreed that you've shared something and it's kind of written down, right? That kind of documentation is important. God forbid you ever had to go to HR. And so I like to stack why a one-on-one is important based off thinking about hierarchy of needs, right? You are really trying to think about the development focused on the person, right? Them, not just the ideas of what they're doing, right? So thinking about how you have actual conversation, how you actually have personable conversation, how do you build trust, how do you build psychological safety, good workplace culture, all of this starts in a one-on-one. And what I find is it's more just like, okay, what did you do this week? What are you planning to do next week? What problems do you have? How can I help you? I would rather you think about it. You don't have to follow this exact structure, but I thought I wanted to include it as a resource, right? Start with how are they as a person, right? Move into again, updates are going to have to happen, but it shouldn't be your whole meeting. Like what do they need help with? How can you support them? Feedback, coaching, growth, right? Like this is a nice way for you to structure, and this can be literally your agenda, and you put things under each thing. And I encourage you to not, again, they should help lead this agenda for the most part. But I encourage you to don't skip things unless it like maybe there really isn't any challenge that's happening, right? Okay, fine. But like many people will leave the end because the first couple things took forever. So thinking about how you structure your time effectively, which is why I've said like some people will take out the feedback and goals and put it as like the third meeting of every month, right? Or something. So they know that they're focused on it rather than relying it on something like this. Also, some questions for you to think about and think through how you can, ask those questions, right? So into these kind of categories and this kind of schedule, here are some ways you can actually structure your questions. And obviously don't use the same question every time, but this can help you really think about how do you actually make sure you're hitting the things you want to hit about. And some of these are duplicated from what the first video you saw. AI comes up all the time. I try to give people options. You may or may not be comfortable with them. You also would want to have obviously a conversation with your employee, your company, based off like privacy, data sharing. But I have seen people, especially if you're in a virtual environment, could you be transcribing? Could it help you rewrite some emails that you need to be nicer about, right? That's those simple things. But it could even help you practice difficult conversations, for example. AI has a voice function. I have told and talked to people, and that this would be a whole separate session, but like, could you have a scenario with AI before you actually have it with your employee? Could you actually practice what you're saying and have like somewhat of a reaction from them? You could definitely do it. And you can also think about how you're doing surveys, how you're collecting data. I've had people do really interesting about analyzing like workplace culture, like doing a survey, not through a vendor, right? A lot of vendors try to sell these things, but like actually aggregating data and getting a sense of like how communication patterns are happening or how people are feeling, right? You can ask a lot more qualitative questions nowadays rather than a bunch of Likert scales. So I encourage you to kind of think about could any of these ways help you? don't need that. So I wanted to cover in my last couple, 5 minutes or so, some kind of constructive feedback solutions, because that's usually a communication piece that everyone is looking for. So first, how did it feel to give constructive feedback? Many of you said that that's one of the things why communication is hard, but how did you feel like it was delivered? Did you feel good about it? Did you feel awkward? Go in the chat and tell me. I got choppy, unsure. Anyone else want to tell me what you think? Uncomfortable, defensive, awkward. I hear that a lot. I've already said this, but conversation is always going to be better. If you have something to say, especially in terms of constructive feedback, please don't email it. Please don't text it. Also, prepare them with what you're going to be talking about. So if you need to have that, do you have a minute to chat? Or you're going to bring it up in a one-on-one. Please don't be vague. Please be somewhat specific. I'm not telling you to explain what you're going to talk to them about, but like, hey, I would love to find a time for us to connect about what happened yesterday. Again, so they have the context and they're prepared for it. And so how do you do it? Again, this is something, in a lot of professional development, like in-person types of small group conversations I like to work through. But really walking through these steps is going to be crucial to you. Thinking about how do you choose where and when you're doing it? How do you actually frame the conversation? I am a person of like thinking about the sandwich technique. You hear this a lot, but right, starting with positive, constructive, positive, and focusing with on the behavior and not them as a person, right? Like everyone says it like, don't take it personally. But what does that actually mean, right? So trying to think about how you're phrasing it clearly and being objective is really important. And how do you provide examples? Again, I'm not telling you to necessarily pull out receipts, right? You said this, they said this, it was a rumor mill, but you can be specific in the sense of, in the meeting, to the staff meeting yesterday, Susie came up with a great idea and I felt that you shut her down with some negative comments, and then you can say, right, like I'm using an I statement. And then, how could we better address how we can brainstorm as a group and everyone feel comfortable sharing their ideas? Let's work on this together. Let's think of a solution, right? That's also the coaching, right? I'm asking them questions and not telling them how to solve it, and really think about how you're supporting them as a person, right? Like I want us to be an effective, team. How are we able to kind of make sure that we have this ability to share openly and safely? And so there's a couple models. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to see whatever sits with you. So there are a few here. One is called the SBI model. Again, replicate some of the things I just said, but it's quick for you to remember, right? Like I got to talk about where I'm going to do it, the situation, what it was, the behavior, and what is the impact on other people or progress or thing, right? So this is good for specific types of behaviors you're going to address. Radical candor. You may or may not have heard this. This comes a lot in like when people are thinking about like emotional intelligence and things, right? Like you're actually showing how much you care, right? An empathetic leader, really showing how you're genuine and trying to be able to deliver this feedback in a personable, genuine way. And so, again, there are kind of four cycles you can get through in terms of caring, right? Providing honest feedback, right? You're being, again, the radical piece, right? You're being honest with what you saw or how you handled it. And again, ideally using I statements. And again, trying to address it in real time. The last one is the coin model. Again, somewhat similar, but thinking about the context, the observation that you saw, what's the impact, and then this one really includes the next steps part that I think is important. Like, how are we going to make sure we move forward with this? And so, like I said, I wanted to kind of give those to you as a real important point. So keep all of these. Will be very think about how you're going to explain each situation with someone and how you're going to handle it because it's going to be really crucial to you. And so again, I know that was kind of a lot of pieces, but ideally, I hope you kind of see from where we started of like, why do you even need to care about being a good supervisor and becoming a coach? being supportive, focused on the individual is going to allow you to communicate better if you know what their needs are. How do you actually do that, right? Surveys, ways to talk to them. Much of that's going to come up in the one-on-one meeting. And then lastly, God forbid you have to have a hard conversation. You've already set up for success this entire time. And so I encourage you to really think through each of these things. And with that, I say thank you. We are at right about time. Yeah, I always try to watch the clock. So I'm going to pass it up to Gina. If you have questions and stuff, I'm happy to answer in the chat and stuff, but I want to be mindful of people's time. I put some links on here. I know Gina will refer to some of them, but I also encourage people to reach out to me. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I actually saw a couple pop up on my phone while I was talking. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and thank you, Alex. Yeah, great timing. Perfectly timed for 1 o'clock. Thanks everyone for joining us. As Alex mentioned, I'm gonna put a couple of links in the chat for you. The first one is to our Northeastern Alumni YouTube channel. So this will be uploaded once the link is ready. While you're waiting, you can check out some of the other programs that we have on there. And then our other link is our events page. So we've got a ton going on all across the country, all across the world. So we encourage you to join us in person as well. But with that, we'll leave you to the rest of your day. Thanks so much again for joining us and hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.